So folks, welcome to the biggest Hearthstone review I've ever done. I think there's like 81 cards in this video. I'm going to try to move much more quickly than I normally do, but still hit the key points for each of these cards. Also, apologies for the presentation. I know this is not the most beautiful setup, but it's the most efficient for me as I move through these. So I'm going to go quickly for the quests. I'm going to focus on a few of those a little more and break them down because I'm going to have to kind of go through each piece by piece. So for instance, here with Warrior, this is Raid the Docks, which is a pirate quest. First step, play 3 pirates, then you draw a weapon. Second step, play 2 pirates, deal 2 damage to a random enemy twice. So potentially a little bit of chipboard damage, or can go face, keep in mind, if the board is clear, which is pretty nuts. Secure the supplies is the third step. Play 2 pirates, then you get Captain Rokara. She is a 5-mana 7/7, and she summons the Juggernaut. And the Juggernaut's really cool. It's just like a dormant minion on board, and at the start of your turn, it will summon you a pirate. It will equip a warrior weapon and fire 2 cannons that deal 2 damage. So basically, you get some board or face damage. You get a big weapon potentially to hit. Could get a small weapon, of course. And you get a pirate as well, which on average isn't a huge minion, but it's every single turn. This thing's never going away. So you can just grind your opponent down with weapon damage over time, with chip damage over time, and just free minions as well. So it actually extends the pirate game plan longer, which is really cool and opens up some different angles for pirates. And I have to say, I actually think this quest is going to be pretty darn strong. These requirements are not difficult to play a bunch of pirates. The payoff is both, potentially quick game ending if you've gotten enough damage and you just need those weapons to get over the hump, or it allows you to grind things out a little bit as well. And the rewards on this aren't too bad. The only downside is playing a 1-mana card in an aggro deck like a pirate deck is generally bad. But again, I think the reward here shifts your focus towards a little bit grindier, longer term game plan. It gives you more time than you'd normally have, because you'd run out of gas much quicker in most other pirate builds. That's okay, and you're playing almost more for the mid game or for those post Juggernaut turns. So I actually think this is going to be a high tier deck. I think it'll be very strong. I think this is a 5-star card. So that said, let's move on to some of the pirate support cards here, like the Stormwind Freebooter, 3-mana 3/3, give your hero +2 or attack this turn. So just a little solid minion, kind of like an SI7 agent almost, but you got to use the attack yourself, so can go face, but could also hit some minions. And this is just a nice early to mid game pirate to fuel your quest. So I think this is absolutely a solid card. Frankly, other tempo decks and aggro decks might just be able to run this as well, just for a body and some damage to boot. So I think this is a 4-star card. Not a pirate here, but a different kind of angle for Warrior. The Cowardly Grunt, a 6-mana 6/2 Death Rattle, summon a minion from your deck. So this is basically a big Warrior support card of sorts, helping you cheat out some big crazy stuff potentially, which we've seen work. Big Warrior's been decent. It's been on the back of cards like Commencement though, and this does have a little bit of counter synergy with Commencement. It's not terrible off Commencement, arguably, because the Divine Shield and Taunt aspect that Commencement gives does make this kind of annoying to deal with, that 6 attack, but it's not too tough to push through, so it's not that big defensive wall you often want Commencement to be. And although, yes, this could summon another minion that is a defensive wall, there's some deck building restraints there. So I don't think this is a perfect fit for how we've seen Big Warrior work in the past, but I still think it does have potential. There are cards like this that just find their way into those big fat decks. So I think this is a 3-star card. Moving on to the Harbor Scamp. Perfect pirate synergy card for Rokara and the quest. This is a 2-mana 2/2 Battlecry, draw a pirate. So just keeps your pirates flowing. Make sure you have enough stuff to get your quest done. And yes, this is a little bit lower tempo and a little bit less immediate or aggressive than most pirate things we've seen in the past. But like I said, if this can shift more mid game, it's okay to have cards like these. You're going just a little bit slower because Juggernaut's going to be there to ensure your victory over the course of a game. Also keep in mind, this is just an interesting tutor card. You may not have to put it in a pirate deck necessarily, but you could use 2 of these to chain into a guaranteed another pirate of some sort. I don't know what that'd be right now today, but that's always a possibility to do some cool stuff. Just get, an Anchorman or whatever other cool pirate card you desperately need. So keep an eye out for these tutor sorts of cards. So this is a 4-star card. Next up's the Cargo Guard. This one really shifts what pirates are about. It's a 3-mana 2/4 pirate. At the end of your turn, gain 3 armor. So very defensively minded for a pirate card. Not an aggressive pirate at all. Still think it's decent though, because yet again, in Quest Pirate Warrior, if you're extending the game out longer, having extra armor could buy you turns, could buy you time to make sure you're able to use your Juggernaut to influence the outcome of the game. Just give you that 1 extra turn to hit face, play some more stuff, recover, etc. Also, a pretty intriguing minion for things like N'Zoth builds. This is a really nice pirate because you can gain armor stabilize in the early game, and then also once you play N'Zoth, get a little bit of bonus healing. I don't know that it's necessarily better than something like Rush off Anchorman. That's a possibility for pirates as well that we've seen, or just the 4-mana 5/5 Discover Pirate, but it's an alternative option for decks that really want to be safe and defensive. So I think this is yet again a 4-star card. And that wraps it up for Warrior. So let's move over to Hunter with the new quest. Okay, so this is Hunter's new quest, and it's all about using spells and dealing damage with spells. And man, it's a pretty quick one. So first step is deal damage with 2 spells. So not deal 2 damage with spells, deal damage with 2 spells. If you get that, your hero power can target minions. So it gives you some defensive utility in your hero power. Next step is take the high ground, deal damage with 2 spells. Again, same wording. Set the cost of your hero power to 0. So a cheap free ping to face or minions if you need it. And then next up is knock them down. Again, deal damage with 2 spells. Reward there is Tavish Master Marksman. And Tavish the Master Marksman, for the rest of the game, spells you cast refresh your hero power, which is just crazy. This is basically Shadow Reaper Anduin hero card, but in Hunter and only for spells. It's not every card. It's spells specifically. But that is a lot of potential damage output. So you can target anything with your hero power. Probably going to be going face if you get to this stage. Hit face for 2. Play a 0-mana spell. Hit face for 2. Play a 0-mana spell. Hit face for 2. Play a 1-mana spell. You can see how much crazy damage starts pumping out with this card. And the cool thing about it is, if you look, right, I don't think these requirements are that difficult. I mean, you're wanting to deal damage with Hunter spells anyway. There's a lot of cheap stuff like Wound Prey in particular that's really going to help accelerate this. I don't think you're sacrificing much along the way. Like, the hero power can help you stabilize a little bit by hitting things, but I think you're going to be clearing up the board a lot with these damage spells anyway, because it doesn't have to be deal damage to phase. You can clear minions until you get to this point and then start to win. And then with like lock and load combinations and all the other spell synergy stuff that Hunter's got access to, this seems absolutely bonkers to me. It seems crazy, crazy good. Just like Shadow Reaper Anduin has been in the past as well. And I think that means that this is a 5-star card. So next up, whoopsie, is, let's see, what's next? Rodent Nest, a new 4-drop Death Rattle, summon 5 1/1 rats. So we've got here another like super wide board token style Hunter card, and I'm still not sold that these are going to make sense. Like, there's this like package of wide board things. It just always feels really slow and really passive. And like the same thing with this card, low stats up front, the stats on the back half. Like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but it's just easily wiped up with all kinds of cheap AoEs. You know, if you trade this in, they're just kind of sitting there, sitting ducks / sitting rats that aren't really doing much. So I just don't see this line coming together with all these different token rats. So I think this is only a 2-star card. There's the rat, by the way, same as the other rats we saw. Next up's the Leatherworking Kit, 2-mana 0/3 weapon for Hunter. After 3 friendly beasts die, draw a beast and give it +1/+1. So some hand buff style stuff happening here. And of course, it's not super hard for Hunter to kill off beasts. We've got all these like Rush Hyenas. You've got the token stuff that you just saw. So this could push through your deck, help you draw a little bit, and get a little bit of hand buff along the way, which, hey, that's all fine. Those are cool things. But again, this card feels like it's going to take forever to actually get up to Steam. And it's just all, you know, for the future, for the future, for the future. Whereas Hunter traditionally likes to go, go, go now and deal damage and play the game from the front, not from the behind. So I just don't see how this really lines up with Hunter's game plan. Again, it all feels just a little bit too passive and on the back foot and slow and demanding and conditional. So all in all, you know, yes, of course, it's draw 3 on a 2-mana card, which seems cool, but it's just so slow in the way that it draws. I think this is, again, only a 2-star card. Next up is the Stormwind Piper. So this one's a little bit of a support piece for these wide board token decks, but I still don't think it's good enough. It's a 3-mana 1/6 demon, and after this minion attacks, give your beasts +1/+1. So if you have all these like wide board rats chilling or hyenas or whatever, and you've managed to get this on board and attack with it, you finally get a wide board buff. You finally start doing like what token decks are good at, right? But it's so hard to line up because you have to have this on board already, or you have to arbitrarily give this rush some way, both of which demand, you know, additional support pieces. So this card isn't like self-sufficient. If you don't happen to have the right board set up for this, this card's kind of stranded. So again, it just feels clunky and awkward and slow, and that's not good for Hunter historically. So I have to say it again, this is a 2-star card. Next up is Devouring Swarm, another 0-mana spell, which is intriguing because of what we saw earlier with Quest. This could just feed some free hero powers. This one reads, choose an enemy minion, your minions attack it, then return any that die to your hand. So some neat ways to potentially reload a bunch of cheap stuff like hyenas. You know, you could summon a board of hyenas and then have them all run in. Or like this is a little bit better with the non-rush rat cards like we just saw with the Death Rattle as well. So you can actually put those into action immediately. But again, it's just not that efficient, I don't think, to trade in all your 1/1 minions, basically. Get a bunch of 1/1s back in hand. There's not enough like hand buff support. The 1/1s that are back in hand are still just passively sitting there. Yes, it's like these endless waves of dudes over and over again, but they're just not impactful enough when they happen. That said, I think this card does have a little bit more utility just as a 0-mana card. There's also some stuff just like poisonous minions that might take this in a different angle that's more intriguing. There's also like maybe a value line where you just have some like really cool minion you want to trade in and get an extra copy of. So it's another possibility for this card as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one 3 stars because I think it has a second line of play outside of just you know, these token hunter things. And then finally is Aimed Shot. This card seems just fantastic to me. It's 3 mana, deal 3 damage, or next 0 power deals 2 more damage. So this is good on its own, I think. Even if we didn't have the Hunter quest that we just saw, I think this would just be a lot of damage output. It's kind of like an old kill command, right? Because very often late in the game, you have spare mana, you're hero powering and casting your damage spells anyways. This is basically just 3 mana, deal 5. That's historically been awesome for Hunter. Hunter loves damage. They like spells that deal damage now, we know as well. And this supports the pings off of your hero power as well. So this looks really fantastic. This is a high, strong 4-star card. So next up, we're going to move over to Rogue, who has a quest as well. All right, so this is Find the Imposter Rogue's quest, and there's a lot of moving pieces to this one. So bear with me as we kind of scroll through these individually. I'm going to try to go slow enough that this makes sense. Namely, the questline kicks off, play 2 SI7 cards. And you might say, what the heck is an SI7 card? Well, we're going to talk about these all more in detail in a minute. But the SI7 cards are these. Basically, there's, I think, 4 or 5 new SI7 named cards in Rogue. There's the SI7 Informant that we'll talk about, SI7 Extortion, SI7 Operative, SI7 Assassin, and SI7 Skulker, which I believe are all of them. So there's, I guess, what, that was like 5 cards, and then also SI7, the normal SI7 agent we all know and love from the days of old, will also count, presumably. So kind of 6 SI7 cards that you can run in your deck, 2 of each of those, so like 12 SI7 cards. And once you play 2, well, let's go back to the first step. Once you play 2, you'll add a spy gizmo to your hand. Now, what the heck's a spy gizmo? Well, let's go take a look at those. The spy gizmos are kind of like spare parts, but much more varied. And they're actually really powerful effects. So, for instance, Fizz Flash Distractor returns an enemy minion to its owner's hand. They can't play it next turn, so it's like a better sap for 1 mana. These are not collectible cards, by the way. These are only unlocked via other things like the Rogue Quest. I guess only the Rogue Quest, I think. There's also the Spiomatic. This is another gizmo. 1 mana, 3/2 mech. Battle Cry, look at 3 cards in your opponent's deck. Pick one to put on top. So you get a nicely overstatted minion for its cost, but also some disruption to your opponent's draw, making them draw their worst card. You also got the Noggin Fog Generator. This is, I think, kind of the worst one, but still not bad. It's 1 mana and a +2 attack on a minion that also gains stealth. So you can either take kind of the +2 attack now and lose the stealth, or, you know, if the minion has already attacked, or if you just want to bank it for next turn, you can give it stealth and +2 attack to get some extra damage through. This is, I think, kind of the low roll that's there to make sure the gizmos aren't crazy strong. Next up's the Hidden Gyro Blade, a 1 mana 3/2 weapon. Death Rattle, throw this at a random enemy minion. So you get some damage face, like 1 mana, hit face a couple times, and then also a board clear to help you keep, or not clear, but a minion kill potentially on a small minion to help you keep up. And then finally, there's the Undercover Mole, a 1 mana 2/3 beast with stealth. And after this attacks, at a random card in your hand from your opponent's class. So this is, God, I can't remember his name, and I literally played with him today. That old 2 mana 2/3 or 3 mana 2/3 stealth guy, legendary guy that adds Burgle style cards to your hand. This card does the exact same thing, but it's only 1 mana. What's his name? Not Shekzara. What is something like that? I can't think of his name. Anyway, you know who I'm talking about. That old dude. I know it's something like that. Shamu? That's a whale. I don't know. So anyway, back to the quest. You got to play 2 SI7s. You get a Spy Gizmo. You got to play 2 SI7s. You get a Spy Gizmo. So you're just kind of naturally playing cards and getting gizmos. The gizmos are very powerful. So you've gained 2. Then you're going to get Scabs. And he's going to add 1 of each gizmo to your hand. So again, a bunch of really cool stuff. That said, I don't think these gizmos are inherently game winning, right? Like a slightly better sap and a cool weapon and a mole. It's just nothing is like taking over the game. So you're really committing to this SI7 agent line for, you know, good cards. It's sort of in the vein of like a Ysera, right? Like Ysera, you play, you get 5 good cards in hand that are better than average cards. Scabs is kind of the same way. So you're getting 7 total gizmos added to your hand for running the quest, but also having to run the SI7 cards, which I think this is actually a little bit of a problem. I don't think the SI7 cards are that great, which we're going to talk about. So on that note, I'm actually going to give the Scabs quest here just 2 stars because I think this entire package being committed into one is gonna be too big of an ask for the payoff on Scabs quest, and we'll take a look at these SI7 cards now to substantiate that claim. So this is the SI7 Informant. It's 4 mana 3/3, gains +1/+1 for each SI7 card you've played this game. So this is like, you know, potentially in the late game, you know, we're looking at like a 7/7, 10/10 if things have gone really well, but it's going to take a while for this one to get to a stat line that's compelling for 4 mana. And even then, it's just a stat line. It still dies to so many different kinds of removal that this one feels like it just doesn't have the payoff necessary to make it worth it again for all these SI7 cards. So I think, unfortunately, this is a 2-star card. SI7 Extortion is definitely a little more interesting. Number one, it's tradable, so it has some nice flexibility. And sorry, the graphics are weird on these tradable ones. But it's just nice and flexible, right? It's really cheap. It just starts moving through boards, for instance, chipping away through your opponent's stuff. It also could technically go face at the beginning of a round of damage as well, which is sometimes fine. You just want to throw it face just to get rolling. That's cool. So nice flexible tool here. I think this is 3 mana, and this is arguably, of course, playable outside of SI7 decks as well, unlike the previous card. So 3 stars on this one. There's also the SI7 Operative, a 3 mana 2/4 with Rush. After this attacks a minion, gains stealth. I don't think this is compelling enough. Like leaving behind a 2/2 or something with stealth isn't really that interesting. And the stat line here isn't that great for trading either, right? Like you want it to have high health totals, of course, but it's not going to take that many great trades on turn 3. There's like 3 3s around already where it's like, this just isn't that exciting or interesting. So this is literally a 2-star card. Then there's the SI7 Assassin, which is 7 mana 4/4, and it costs 1 less for each SI7 card you've played this game, and it combos destroy an enemy minion. So this is definitely a higher payoff, right? This is like an awesome Vile Spine Slayer sometimes, because if you've played 3 or 4 SI7 cards, this is down to 2, 3, 4 mana sometimes pretty easily, and that's going to be a great swing card. Awesome tempo removal card. The problem is you got to run all these other SI7 cards, which I don't think are that great. And I don't know if this is rewarding enough. I don't know if the Scab's Quest is rewarding enough. I definitely don't think that mini Edwin card is rewarding enough. So like this one makes the most sense. It's better theoretically, but it's tied down to all these other cards. So I can still in good conscience only really give this one 3 stars. Next up's the SI7 Skulker. It's actually a neutral card, but an SI7 card. It's a 2-mana 2/2 stealth with Battle Cry. The next card you draw costs 1 less. I think this one's a little more interesting. You could almost put this in other decks, just trying to cycle through some cheap stuff. And, you know, getting a stealth minion down can hit face sometimes. It's fine. Play into some buffs. So there could be some deck out there that finds a home for this. I think it's pretty unlikely still. It's not really directed enough. I don't think stealth decks really need to discount a card by 1. They're usually burning through the resources so quickly that discounts maybe don't help that much. And, you know, there might be just better stealth things to play off of that offer more consistency. And again, I don't think this is enough to fuel or substantiate an SI7 deck. So I got to say on this guy, he's probably a 3-star card, but just not enough. So next up, a couple other rogue cards here. If I remember right, we got Lone Shark. Which is a 3-mana 3/4 beast, gives your opponent a coin, and then Death Rattle, you get 2. So we've got a couple cards like this popping into Stormwind. Yeah, it's fine, right? It's Death Rattle synergies. If there's some deck that needs to cast a bunch of spells and has a payoff for that, this could definitely be a way to fuel that, much like the Mailbox Dancer we saw as well. It's a fine stat line, but, you know, there is some downside here that your opponent gets to net the coin before you do, and this could die in the meantime. So not actually that consistent or reliable. I think this is still just a 3-star card. And then this next one is absolutely bonkers. I don't even know what to make of this. This is Maestra of the Masquerade. It's a 2-mana 3/2, and it reads, you start the game as a different class until you play a rogue card. So there's 2 angles for this, right? Number one is like you run a bunch of neutral cards that discover stuff, and you get to play with another class's cards, which can maybe fuel like Burgle style synergies where you need stuff from other classes. In Wild in particular, that'd be nuts. In Standard at the moment, I don't think we have much support for that. The second angle is sort of a, you know, surprise element where your opponent thinks they're playing against a priest and they mulligan against priest, and you know, they're not worried about like taking damage, they're worried about value, and then you just like slam them with rogue cards and just race them down at the cost of only running, you know, a 2-mana 3/2 in your deck, which really isn't much of a cost. Some decks might just be willing to play for the surprise element there to steal a game out. So, you know, this is one of those cards where it doesn't really technically do anything great usually, because, you know, if you're starting as a random class, it may not support your game plan. You might get priest and it just slows you down because you have like discover cards. I don't know if it's worth it for just the surprise element and the like bad mulligan element, because sometimes you're just going to roll another aggro class, your opponent mulligans the same. So catching them off guard is only going to happen like 50% of the time or something, right? So this feels like a sneaky meme card. That said, maybe the Burgle line pops back up, number one, and maybe that surprise element is worth a percentage point here or there, and there's just not much downside to running this. So perhaps it pops into a deck. I'm going to go ahead and give this one 3 stars. All right, so next up, we're going to move into just classes alphabetically here, since we're through all the cool quest lines I wanted to talk about. Starting off with Demon Hunter. This is the Irebound Brute, 7-mana, 6/7 taunt that costs 1 less for each card drawn this turn. So this is basically always a 6-mana 6/7 because you just draw a card naturally at the start of your turn, and then gets cheaper as you draw more and more stuff. This is clearly meant to support the Demon Hunter quest line, to give you some kind of tempo recovery, which is what I was worried about for the quest line. That said, it's still not usually going to go to 0. I don't know how easy it's going to be to squeeze into a turn. You know, if you're playing like Glide on turn 4, for instance, you're still not going to be able to fit this guy in. So he's going to come down much, much later in the game than you might like to recover the tempo necessary to play the Demon Hunter quest. That said, he's still kind of cool sometimes, just drawing a couple cards and maybe having like some big demon stuff going on. So I definitely don't think it's impossible for a guy like this to see some notable play. That's why I think this is actually a 3-star card. Next up's the Fell Barrage, 2-mana spell. Deal 2 damage to the lowest health enemy twice. This is cool. We've seen this effect in duels coming into Standard as a card now as well. And this could be a board clear, right? You can like kill a 4 health minion, you can kill 2/2/2s or whatever, but you can also go face sometimes. If you manage to clear your opponent's board, this is 2 mana, deal 4. It's also a fell spell, so some crazy synergies with Jace. You could easily see Jace like wiping your opponent's board, dealing a bunch of extra damage with Fell Barrage. So I think this is actually a pretty strong card. Inside Jace decks, maybe even outside of them is some extra burst damage potential. I think this one's a 4-star card. The Sigil of Alacrity. New sigil, 1 mana. At the start of your next turn, draw a card and reduce its cost by 1. So this is another way to fuel Demon Hunter Quest, potentially lining up more card draws into a single turn. It's also just a cheap cycle and discount. I don't think it's really worth it as just a cheap cycle and discount. Demon Hunter has way too many other ways to really efficiently draw cards on demand. So is this enough to get the quest there? I'm still not really buying into the Demon Hunter quest. I don't know if the reward is great enough to run all these cards and really try to support it so hard. So unfortunately, I think this one's still only a 2-star card. Next up's the Fell Gorger, a 4 mana 4/3 demon. Battlecry, draw a Fell spell and reduce its cost by 2. So pretty nifty here to get a Fell deck rolling an engine for Jace. I like any kind of tutor cards like these because even if you're not just running a bunch of Fell spells, this can sometimes help you find one really specific tool, whether that's now or in the future. And the cost reduction is pretty neat too. Could help you set up combos or just keep your turn running because you know you're playing kind of an understated minion here. But if you draw a nice Fell spell that helps you recover the board, that's great. You just move through Fell spells, you put them in the deck for your Jace pop off Shutterwalk style thing, and the gears are turning, so I think this is a 4-star card. Next up's Metamorphin, a 1 mana 1/2 Murloc with Taunt and Battlecry. If you've cast a Fell spell this turn, gain +2/+2. So this is a pretty cool little guy to help you dump some extra minions in play and get maybe a little bit of defensive utility along the way if you're cycling through Fell spells. I wouldn't be shocked if this makes it into a deck here and there. It's just one of those flexible cards that makes a pretty big impact, slows down your opponent, helps you move towards the late game. So some interesting utility in this one. A little bit narrow in its focus, of course, with Fell spells, but that's a lot of Demon Hunter spells are Fell spells. So some decks might be able to make this work rather well. So I'm going to go ahead and say 4-star card. And then next up is Chaos Leash, a new 3 mana spell, Lifesteal, deal 3 damage to a minion or outcast, deal 5 instead. So kind of like an expensive I-Beam at its base. Although I sometimes think, you know, paying 3 mana for I-Beam is not the end of the world in many cases. If you outcast it, you get to deal 5 instead. I don't think that's really a great extra reward over I-Beam. I think the mana flexibility of I-Beam, you'd run it over Chaos Leech. I said there might be decks that run both. I don't think OTK Demon Hunter needs this. They have plenty of ways to deal damage and they want affordable cards as much as possible. So I don't know if it's better for OTK Demon Hunter. Well, I don't know how often the I-Beam gets outcasted in OTK Demon Hunter because I don't play that deck. Maybe this is, but it's the same. So no, it's not better for OTK Demon Hunter, I don't think ever. I don't think it's really better in general either, but if you need a critical mass of Fell spells for things like your Jace pop-offs, maybe you have to run this. Maybe this extends beyond, I-Beam's life and makes it worth it. But I don't think this card's particularly awesome. I think this is still probably just a 2-star card. Finally is Lion's Frenzy, 3 mana 0/2, has attack equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. So this is like, another card you set up, you have your big pop off, draw a turn later, and this is supposed to recover a little bit of the tempo downside you've taken by drawing a bunch of cards. So, maybe this becomes a 3 mana 5/2 weapon, which sounds cool, but I don't really think I like it. It's a 1/2 at base, right? Because you've just drawn a card naturally at the start of your turn. Nobody's excited about playing a 3 mana 1/2, so you really have to follow it up, and you probably want to set it up for future turns. So you're kind of, again, taking like a tempo down turn where you just maybe spend 3 mana and that's it. Play for Glide on turn 4, and sure, you have a 5/2 weapon on turn 4. Are you hitting face with that? Are you hitting a minion? You gave up your turn 3. It just feels like you're sacrificing a lot of tempo again to achieve this game plan. So I don't know if this one's going to be worth it. I don't think the payoff is there. If this had Lifesteal and you expected the damage numbers to be smaller, I think it'd be cooler because you'd have more stabilization. But this is going to be wanting to go face in many cases. Running a 5/2 weapon into a 3/3 or whatever. It's not that interesting, I don't think. So Again, I think I got to give this one 2 stars. All right, moving over to Druid. This is Sow the Soil, a 1-mana spell. Choose one, give your minions +1 attack, or summon a 2/2 Treant. And I actually like this card pretty well. And we can look at the tokens there if you want. There's the plus, or there's the 2/2. There's the 1 attack. There's what the 2/2 looks like. Pretty cute little guy. But I like this. I think it's a nice flexible tool if you need tempo on one. You just need to get a 2/2 down. It's great. That's efficient. Or it's follow-up later in the game if you draw it and you have a wide board. It's just a little extra damage push that's very cheap, which can be nice. And still with like things like Solar Eclipse, it can still push quite a bit of damage if the board's there. So it's a nature spell. It checks a lot of boxes basically for token Druid. So I think this will be a nice 4-star card. Next up's the Wicker Claw, a 2-mana 1/4 beast. After your hero gains attack, this minion gains +2 attack. So the idea here, right, is you play this on 2. It's not going to die too often as a 4 health minion. It's pretty hard to kill 4 health minions. Then you go for some kind of attack buff on 3, Moontouched Amulet, Feral Rage, whatever it is, and this becomes a 3/4, which maybe eats your opponent's minion, or maybe it just goes face because you're whacking face really hard with all your different face attack cards and something like a Guff Druid deck. And you know what? I kind of like this card. It's gaining the attack permanently, right? It's not just like this turn or anything. So it's got the potential to scale if your opponent doesn't deal with it. Even just hero power following up on it sometimes would be fine if you whiff on your curve, but you're going to need pressure if that deck's going to work. And I kind of think this is a good minion. Like, it's a 2-mana 3/4 in many cases. The problem, of course, is when you don't hit the attack buff follow up. Maybe you don't have the pounce to play immediately. Maybe you don't have the 3-mana follow up for it. And then it falls a little short. So, you know, I'm still going to give this just 3 stars, but keep an eye on this card. This could be one of those that's like kind of sneaky OP, and we're just like taking 5 off this thing all the time. And it's just totally opening up that deck's possibilities. Next up is Composting, 2-mana spell. Give your minions Death Rattle, draw a card. So basically, wide board token support. That said, I don't really like this. I think Druid has plenty of ways to draw cards for token decks. I mean, Druids have full hands very, very often. And this doesn't really contribute to stabilizing a board, which is really what you're looking for most of the time. Once you've gotten that wide board in Druid, you're not necessarily looking for a hand reload. You're looking to terminate the game. You want to kill the opponent. So, you know, Soul of the Forest and those sorts of cards are way better to support. So although this is cheap, I just don't think it really contributes that much to the game plan. Outside of a token Druid deck, you know, if you just played this like on 2 minions, is that worth it for 2 mana? Potentially, but it's delayed, it's passive. Doesn't feel like the kind of things that make card draw good, which is usually when you want to draw right away. So I think this is only a 2-star card. Next up's the Vibrant Squirrel, a 1-mana 2/1. Death Rattle, shuffle 4 acorns into your deck, and when drawn, those summon a 2/1 squirrel. The acorns here, that's the acorn, and here's the squirrel. He's satisfied and fat. He's pretty cute. And this is a pretty intriguing card, right? It makes a lot of sense for token Druid because it's just kind of a free 2/1 every once in a while still developing a little bit of early game, because you are drawing often a ton of stuff. Like, you're playing all those Fungal Fortunes and stuff in token Druid, moving through your deck, you're going to get some free 2/1s. That said, I don't know if the 2/1 upside's there. Like, you might just rather this be another card draw card or another big wide board builder, because the 2/1s are going to be staggered. And the thing about token Druid is you want to hit that big board all at once, right? And how often is the 2/1 going to get summoned at the right moment to complement that board? How often is it actually going to clog out the board for, you know, your Glowfly Swarm and kind of steal a spot almost? It might be more awkward than it is good, but it is just a lot of stuff for 1 mana, so that has me intrigued. If you need to just get an extra minion here and there, maybe it's enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this one 3 stars. All right, Mage is next, and Antonidas is back. What? 8 mana 6/6 Grand Magus Antonidas looks super cool with his horse and stuff. Battle Cry, if you've cast a fire spell on each of your last 3 turns, cast 3 fireballs at random enemies. And that's pretty crazy, right? And there's a lot of new fire spells, by the way, we're going to take a look at here in a second. So there's like a Fire Mage deck coming together, and this is a great big finisher for it. Clearly, if your opponent has a board, these might be used to clear board with the fireballs. Even if they have a board, you might still send 3 to face if you're uber lucky for 18 damage. Also, you might not have anything on board, and it's a guaranteed 18 damage for 8 mana if you're able to clear your opponent's board or just be ahead enough that they kind of had to recover and had an empty board left, which is just totally ridiculous. I can never count a card like this out because it's just so much damage. It's just such a high output card. That's scary, right? Like 18 damage for 8 mana is crazy. So, you know, I think there's plenty of fire spells, as you're about to see. I don't think it's going to be that hard to set up. Like, you're going to know, like, okay, I got Antonidas in 3 turns. You're going to be kind of enacting a game plan anyway. So it might seem like there's a lot of setup here, but you're just playing Hearthstone, right? You're not doing anything out of the ordinary. And in fact, there's going to be some nice cheap fire spells that kind of squeeze into turns. So I think this is actually going to be a 5-star card, a very powerful finisher. Speaking of fire spells, we've also got Prester's Pyromancer here. 2 mana, 2/3 Battlecry. Your next fire spell has spell damage +2. So great way to just pump up a fire spell. This isn't notably, you know, a lot better than like Talented Arcanist. It only has slightly better stats. So you would run this over Arcanist if, you know, you had only fire spells in your deck. Otherwise, it's not really that much more interesting. And despite having a lot of cool fire stuff and Antonidas, I don't know if this card's actually going to be good enough. I think you'll just want a higher density of fire spells. And the damage bump here may not really add up to all that much. So I'm going to go ahead and say Prester's Pyromancer is only a 3-star card. Next up is the Sanctum Chandler. It does not say Chandelier, it's a Chandler. It's a 5 mana 4/5 elemental. After you cast a fire spell, draw a spell. So a little bit of engine here, kind of a Gadgetzan auctioneer of sorts, but only for fire spells. And there are going to be some cheap fire spells. Like, maybe should have showed you those first to give you an idea of what's possible with this guy. But I think this could go in a fire spell mage deck to make sure you're cycling into a bunch of stuff like this card, Ignite. 2 mana, deal 2 damage. Shuffle an Ignite into your deck that deals 1 more damage. You might want to draw a bunch of those, and the Chandler could help you do that. It is rather expensive, though, at 5 mana, so it's kind of late game oriented, and spending a lot of mana on top of this is it's gonna take a big commitment for just card draw. So that does make me a little nervous on this one. So I'm actually gonna give it 3 stars again. Next up, though, is Ignite. It's 2 mana, deal 2 damage. Shuffle an Ignite into your deck that deals 1 more damage. I think this card's, first off, really cool. XRT's this in an AMA previously, and I just think it's pretty good. It's not terrible at a base level. You're not excited about just dealing 2, but it's going to scale up pretty nuts. You know, 2 mana, deal 3 is great. 2 mana, deal 4 is really good, et cetera, et cetera. And it just gives you this like kind of inevitability almost. And make sure you have enough fire spell density as well to get things like your Antonidas rolling. So pretty nifty card and lots of damage pump out. So I'm going to give this one 4 stars. Next up is the Clumsy Courier. It's a big spell synergy card, 7 mana 4/5. Battlecry casts the highest cost spell from your hand. We've seen a lot of cards like this work in history of Hearthstone before, basically cheating something out by a mana or 2, maybe like the big fireworks card that summons, you know, a bunch of 8/8 elementals, those sorts of things. Could be pretty nice off this, while also kind of developing a free 4/5 in a sense. So, you know, a card to keep an eye on. I don't think this is necessarily always going to come together. I'm going to give this 3 stars again, but definitely could be intriguing if the right things line up. So next up is First Flame here, a 1 mana spell. Deal 2 damage to a minion and add a second flame to your hand. That also just deals 2 damage to a minion. So kind of like Twin Spell, deal damage to minions. A bit like the Ray of Frost of old, almost, except not with the freeze, but, you know, 2 points of damage each time. And I think this is actually really cool. Not only does it, you know, set up your Antonidas, maybe play into that Chandler dude as cheap fireball or fire spell synergy stuff, but just, you know, cheap, easy tempo removal like this can get you through the game. And the fact that this is staggered means 1 card could buy you 2 turns for Antonidas to help you find that win condition, which is cool. Next up is another sort of big spell synergy tool here, I guess. The Celestial Ink Set, 2 mana 0/2. After you spend 5 mana on spells, reduce the cost of a spell in your hand by 5. So clearly you want this to bigger stuff. You don't want your 1 mana spells getting discounted by 5. So big spell synergy. I think this is actually a little bit awkward. It's just like hitting the right spell in hand is going to be tough if you're running enough spells. And you kind of have to run enough spells to get this off. Like, yeah, you could just run only 5 mana spells, I guess, technically. and just like chain, you know, that 5-mana spell into the next one being free. Like maybe that's cool with Apex's Blasts or Fireballs or something, but you know, in Spell Mage, you can't do that because you have too many low cost spells weaved in there. So I think there's like just some deck building constraints and awkwardness around this. I don't know if the payoff is going to be quite good enough for this one. So despite the huge discounts, I think I'm only going to give this 2 stars. I may come to regret that someday, but I just got a feeling it's going to be weird to use. Next up is Hot Streak, which is another 0-mana spell, and it is a fire spell, and it reads your next fire spell this turn costs 2 less. So this is really the card that could fuel Chandler to make it nice, because not only is this 0-mana spell that cycles, but it also makes another fire spell like Ignite be 0 mana as well. So you got a 5-mana 4/5 that's suddenly drawing you 2 cards while you're also maybe, you know, clearing something on your opponent's side of the board. So this is a pretty intriguing engine for Chandler and all of this stuff together. I don't know if it's good enough to run outside of that. It is a total net discount, so if you need to squeeze a bunch of damage into a turn, you might lose some cool stuff with this one, but also just support for all these fire synergy sorts of plays, which I think means this is maybe a 4-star card. All right, so now we're moving over to Paladin with City Tax, 2-mana tradable card, lifesteal, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, and I think it's actually pretty cool follow-up for things like Bear Off or Equality, making for a nice board clear that's also going to regain a little bit of life. So any sort of slower Paladin deck could use this as a follow-up. Tradable means you can also kind of pass it off for a while if you don't need it, or depending on the matchup. So that flexibility I think is actually pretty cool for this one, meaning this is a 4-star card. Next up is High Lord 4 Dragon. Bolvar's back. 6-mana 5/5 Divine Shield. After friendly minion loses Divine Shield, give a minion in your hand +5/+5. So some really crazy Divine Shield hand buff potential with this one. Namely, 4 Dragon himself has Divine Shield, so if your opponent just clears him traditionally through damage and has to pop that Divine Shield, he might give at least +5/+5. And then if you have any other minions on board, or maybe rush minions you play simultaneous with this, the buffs are going to really start going crazy. Quite a bit of potential here to get, you know, 2-3 buffs pretty reliably, making Bolvar a really big stat dump. That said, same problem as hand buff always has. Like, this is coming fairly late in the game, and stats often become a little bit less impactful as a game wages on and people's game plans are initiated and they get access to more and more removal. So you always have some concerns this might just be a little bit too slow of a follow-up, or maybe your hand's a little too empty by the time you get to Bolvar here at 6 mana. That said, we're getting a lot of these Divine Shield pieces and some other hand buff support stuff. So this line's starting to look like it has potential, but I still always have those doubts for hand buff if the things don't have like charge or magnetic like you see in Wild. So still going to hold a little cautiously at 3 stars for 4 Dragon. Next up is Blessed Goods, a 1-mana spell, discover a secret weapon or Divine Shield minion here. So this is a really cool little flexible card. Basically a way to fill in some gaps in a bunch of different decks. Really cool with the 1-mana quest deck, for instance, because this is a 1-mana card and it discovers you a secret, which is a 1-mana card. So that's guaranteed 2 activations right there if you need it. Also, you could run this in a Divine Shield deck for a little bit of flexibility. Weapons are cool as well. So this is a nice little utility card. I think this is flexible enough and interesting enough as a discover card. This could make it into a handful of decks as a 4-star card. Next up's the Alliance Bannerman, a 3-mana 2/2 battlecry. Draw a minion and then give minions in your hand +1/+1. This is a really great activator for that 4-drop Divine Shield Rush minion we saw on curve. Also draws a minion, so you're having more stuff in hand for this hand buff, which is nice. And like, yeah, you're taking a downturn. A 3-mana 2/2 is not exciting, so it's still that same hesitation. Like, are you going to be able to flip this back enough? Divine Shield Rush minion's pretty nice. There's some other great follow-up plays too, so maybe this is getting there. This is also just, you know, a minion tutor in hand buff. It doesn't necessarily have to go in a like Divine Shield hand buff deck. It could just go in a generalized deck that's running minions. So this, I think, has a little bit of extra flexibility and utility beyond just this one specific thing. So I'm actually going to bump this particular card up to 4 stars. Next up is Noble Mount, a 2-mana spell. The mount for Cariel. Give a minion +1/+1 and Divine Shield. When it dies, summon a Warhorse. And as you might expect, a Warhorse is a 1/1 with Divine Shield. So this is a lot of Divine Shield action that would be great for things like 4 Dragon and a Divine Shield synergy deck. Also, it's just decent to take trades, right? Like you got a minion on board, you bump it up a little, give it a nice trade value off Divine Shield. Also got some stickiness left behind as well to disrupt your opponent and get in the way. So I think this card's actually pretty cool in a variety of different spots. Buff stuff, rush stuff, Divine Shield stuff. I'm actually going to give this one 4 stars again. Next up's the Catacomb Guard, a 3-mana 1/4 with Lifesteal, and Battlecry deal damage equal to this minion's attack to an enemy minion. So a really cool little swing card that scales rather nicely, of course, with any sort of hand buff. 1 buff takes us to 2/4. We've seen a card like this, I think it was in Hunter long ago, but this one just has way better numbers, basically, than that did, and the Lifesteal upside is really awesome as well. So, you know, these are the kinds of cards you need to fuel a hand buff deck, because it's recovery both on the health standpoint and on a tempo/board swing standpoint. So these are the kind of things you need if you're taking all these downturns, buffing your hand, playing for low tempo. These are what help you swing back. And I gotta say, I feel like this one's actually a pretty solid option there. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this card 4 stars again. And I guess that's it for our Paladin cards, huh? Not that many. So we'll move on to Priest cards with the Shadow Cloth Needle, a 2-mana weapon, 0/3. After you cast a Shadow spell, deal 1 damage to all enemies. So this is basically, 2 mana, deal 3 to face. Plus, it also hits board, could help chip away through some of your opponent's stuff. And as we're about to see, there's quite a bit of Shadow stuff that cares about face damage happening. And I think this might actually be pretty complimentary piece that helps you keep the board in check while you're racing your opponent's health total down, sometimes risking your own health total in the process. So for a Dark Bishop Benedictus deck, I think this could be a pretty valuable tool for that deck. I'm gonna go ahead and give this card 4 stars. Next up, Shard of the Naru, 1-mana tradable spell that silences all enemy minions. So pretty cool silence effect, right? It's a very high output for 1 mana, silencing everything. Tradable also I like, because in a matchup where you don't need silence, you can toss this away and get something else instead, adding to a lot of flexibility for a more tech-oriented card like this. That said, I have to say, I don't know how often Priest actually needs to silence all enemy minions. Sometimes, silencing away value cards is great if you're in like a value line, like Librams or something. But, silences across the board like this are usually good when you're trying to hit face, right? You want to push minions through taunts and stuff. That could be a great way to use these sorts of silences. I don't think Priest needs to do that. They're usually playing the game a little bit slower, over the top, or just grinding people down through value and gigantic boards. So I don't know how much utility this one actually offers. I think only very specific metals will really suit this card at all, and it'll be pretty limited utility for this particular class. Somebody like Demon Hunter or something could use this well, or Hunter, Warrior wanting to go face a lot, but Priest, I think it's a little bit less valuable. So I'm going to say only 3 stars. Next up's the Void Shard here, a big time shadow spell, 4 damage, deal 4 damage, and it has Lifesteal. So I think this is a great way to pump out some extra damage for Priest. Like 4 for 4 is not the most efficient compared to like a Fireball, but Lifesteal is cool because it gives you more time, right? It gives you extra turns, extra survivability. Might also activate some things like Flesh Giants as well if you're healing off of it, or Zyrellas or whatever. So some bonus upside on a card that's still going to push a lot of damage. I wouldn't be totally shocked to see this outside of a Shadow deck, even just as a finishing tool, or some other kind of burst damage for Priests. Who knows when they might need that sort of thing outside of Shadow, but you never know. So I think great in Shadow decks, and potentially even useful outside of them. This feels like a 4-star card. Next up's the Twilight Deceptor, a 2-mana 2/3 battlecry. If any hero took damage this turn, draw a Shadow spell. So nice little way to cycle through your deck and keep drawing into your Shadow spells. Seems cool to me. Decently statted minion that draws. I think this condition's not especially difficult. It makes this maybe a weak turn 2 play, because you're probably not dealing a lot of damage on turn 2 exactly. But late in the game when you're looking for like that crazy damage out from the previous card you need to draw through, Twilight Deceptor could definitely open up that possibility. So this is a 3-star card. The Psy Fiend here, a 3-mana 3/4. After you cast a Shadow spell, deal 2 damage to each hero. So again, damage output here for Priest. The cost on this one makes me a little bit nervous because it feels like you don't really want to play this on 3 necessarily. You probably want to play this later in the game with combinations of a couple different shadow spells. And it might get expensive, you know, if you're playing it with your Void Shard, that's already like 7 mana. Seems like it could be awkward. The self-damage aspect also can, of course, be risky as well if you're facing off against like face hunters and engaging in that sort of race. So there's some risk there. That said, you know, I think there could be worlds where this actually gets cut from a shadow deck. I don't know if they'll need this necessarily to get there. They might just have enough damage outside of a card like this one. So I'm going to give this only 3 stars. And then finally, the Void Touched Attendant, a 1-mana 1/3, and it reads, both heroes take 1 extra damage from all sources. So this is kind of a neat little card, right? It's, first off, sometimes you might want to play this on 1 just to get some tempo out, which is cool. Make your like turn 2 hero power deal an extra damage or something. If you go face with it, that'd be nice. But, you know, if you weave this into a turn with the previous card, right, the Psych Fiend, and you have this kind of pop-off turn where you play 3 or 4 shadow spells that are dealing damage, or from the weapon that you've set up previously, you could start chipping away a lot. But again, it comes at some risk to yourself. So, you know, part of me wants to see a shadow deck that's like more spell driven and not reliant on all of these minions, because they seem to have some downsides and some conditionality that could be tough. That said, I think this one's slightly more flexible than the previous one, but less output. So still kind of counterbalanced, which makes it yet again a 3-star card. All right, next up is Shaman, and I think there's some good cards in Shaman. I'm kind of scared, actually. But starting off here with the Auction House Gavel, a 2-mana 2/2. After your hero attacks, reduce the cost of a Battlecry minion in your hand by 1. So basically a couple discounts netted here, kind of making the Auction House Gavel free after a couple attacks. The 2 attack stat line here is okay. It's not great, though. There's a lot of stuff that gets up to 3 health already, so that might be a little awkward. And therefore, this may not really be worth it that much unless you're trying to open up some really specific like Bolnair, Battlecry synergy turn that wouldn't otherwise be possible. I don't think just as like a general use card where you just sort of run this and you know, try to get a Battlecry pop-off out of it. I don't know if it's going to be worth it in that case because it's just kind of weak in its own right. And yeah, it's free after a while, but there's a lot of other higher impact, higher immediacy sorts of cards. So I'm actually going to say this is only a 2-star card, which sounds kind of insane thinking about it, but I just have a feeling it's not going to get played at all. Next up is Spirit Alpha, a 4-mana 2/5. After you play a card with Overload, summon a 2/3 Spirit Wolf with Taunt. So some crazy Overload synergy here for the Spirit Alpha. But that said, despite how wide boards can get and how sort of crazy scary they can get as like this Uber Violet Teacher kind of card, it's one of those that, again, I think it just demands a little bit too much mana cost. There's one card I think is really good with this, though, which is Lightning Bloom, right? If you play Spirit Alpha and like a Lightning Bloom or 2, get a really big board, get some taunt stabilization, and still play other stuff. But I think it's only Lightning Bloom that this feels great with. Otherwise, you're starting to spend 6, 7, 8 mana to get anything real meaningfully out of the Spirit Alpha. Playing it down and hoping it survives for a future turn to do that seems fairly unlikely with all the rush minions in the world these days. And doing it all at once means it's happening pretty late in the game where the 2/3s, I think, are less impactful. So unless you just really need enough ways to support Overload, I don't think this card gets there. And I think like the quest line supports Overload enough that you could leave this out without really feeling too bad. So I think it's only a 2-star card, which it's sort of crazy. These last 2 cards, like a year ago or 2 or 3 years ago, we would have thought these things are just insane. And now I'm just like, just 2 stars, whatever. Not that exciting. Next up's the Granite Forgeborn here, 4-mana 4/5. It reduces the cost of elementals in your hand and deck by 1, which that is a lot of discounts in an elemental shaman deck. And I think it's pretty good. It's basically, I can't remember the name of the card. My brain doesn't work anymore. 2-mana mage spell that makes all their spells cheap, right? But 4 mana in shaman. Now, I will say, having played Elemental Shaman a little bit, there's those instances where you get in a late game and you're just drawing 1 or 2 elementals a turn or whatever, and you have spare mana anyway, so the discounts may not add up. I guess the question here is, will the discount to your hand be meaningful enough when you play the Granite Forgeborn? Because, you might only have 3 or 4 elementals in hand by the time you get to turn 4. So this is like enormous discounts, and it's long-term discounts, but I don't know how much the discounts are meaningfully different. Like, how many times does it help you cheat out an extra card? You get like a fire elemental on 5 instead of 6, but that's not like, you know, craziness. That said, elemental shaman's already good, and I think the 4-drop taunt that deals 1 damage to everything, I don't know its name either. My god, all these cards have the exact same names nowadays. They're just like rumbling rock dude. That's a pretty easy card to replace. I think it's not that strong, so this one might just squeeze in as just a higher pressure Yeti instead of a, you know, 2/6 taunt. Like, you just might prefer the 4/5 stat line because it's putting out more damage, which elemental shaman likes, and then just naturally feeds back into the game plan with all these elemental discounts as well. So I still think this is a pretty good card. It's maybe not the home run that it looks like at first glance. This is a card I'd probably give like 3.5 stars if that existed, but I'm going to go ahead and bump it up to 4 because mana cheats and discounts in Hearthstone tend to get kind of broken. So next up is the Canal Slogger. Such a weird name. 4 mana, 6/4 with Rush and Lifesteal and Overload 1. I think this card's going to be great at some level. I don't know if it actually goes in an elemental deck because, you know, that deck's more about like playing from ahead, and this card's a little bit more about playing from behind. You want to be trading it in and healing. I don't know if Elemental Shaman needs that, but the numbers on this are just so insane, right? It's just like heal 6, clear something big. It's got Overload synergy potential, Elemental synergy potential. I don't see the deck for this today, but this card just seems like the numbers and the effects are too good not to get played. Some like control deck or mid-range deck's gonna find room for this card at some point in the next year and a half, right? So I gotta give this guy 4 stars. Just seems so strong. Next up is Charged Call. It's a 3 mana spell. Discover a 1-cost minion and summon it. So that sucks, but it upgrades for each Overload card you played this game. So if you play 4 Overload cards, this is going to discover a 5-cost minion and summon it. And if you play 9 Overload cards, it's going to discover a 10-cost minion and summon it. And keep in mind, if you have Shaman Quest, it's going to do that twice because you play Brucon and all your spells go off twice. So you're going to spend 3 mana to summon 2 10/10s or whatever, 2 10-drops. Or I think you'd be pretty happy with 8 drops. You know, you don't necessarily have to go all the way to the moon for this one, but if you're already completing your Brucon, I think we said that's 8 Overload spells. Maybe it was 9. I can't remember. I think it was 3, 3, and 2, so 8. Right there, you got 9 drops already. So I think this is pretty cool follow-up to Brucon Shaman and the kind of Overload reward card that's better than the Wolf we talked about earlier, right? The Wolf, kind of slower, takes a little more mana. This is cheap, flexible, has synergy with a quest reward. This is what I'm excited about when I think about Overload cards. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one 4 stars again. Next up here is Investment Opportunity. 1 mana, draw an Overload card. So just a way to make sure you're hitting your Overload stuff consistently. There's also some tutor synergies or possibilities here where if there's some amazing Overload card that's printed that's like a build around or really opens up a deck somehow, you just run this and you guarantee that you draw it. So that's always an angle for these sorts of cards I want to keep in mind. More generally speaking, I don't know if an Overload deck's going to need this necessarily. You don't love spending 1 mana just to cycle. Even if it's something specific, you might just prefer like a tradable card in its slot because you can just trade that card and you're probably going to hit Overload most of the time anyway if you're running a ton of Overload stuff. So for me, you know, that tutor thing gives this card a glimmer of hope, but I think in most cases, it's just not going to be worth it to cycle when tradable exists in the same expansion. I just run a tradable card in this card slot of any kind of neutral tech tradable card, and I'd feel like I'm pretty much doing almost the same thing. So I think for that reason, I have to give this one 2 stars. All right, so next up here we have Warlock cards. This is entitled Customer, a 6 mana 3/2 battlecry, deal damage equal to your hand size to all other minions. So pretty nifty board clear sort of card here for 6 mana. Very often I think going to be a full board clear. If you're running a handlock deck, you know, you're going to have 6, 7, 8, 10 cards in hand, 9 I guess have to play this guy, but that'll wipe most boards, get you a little bit of tempo from this 3/2. And be another great payoff, actually, for handlock decks. I'm starting to believe a little bit more in handlock's power, but I think you could also use this in just like any deck that's trying to draw a ton. If it's not traditionally handlock, but like a Tamsin deck running a bunch of backfires and stuff, that might be enough to just make this card worth it too as another stabilization tool. So this looks pretty awesome. in a lot of different homes. So I'm going to say 4-star card here. We've also got Dreaded Mount here. This is the mount for Warlock. 3 mana spell. Give a minion +1/+1. When it dies, summon an Endless Dreadsteed, which is the return of Dreadsteed at 1/1. Death Rattle at the end of the turn. Summon Tamsin's Dreadsteed. So basically, you always kind of have a Dreadsteed chilling on board. I just don't think that's good enough. Like, the buff is not great. 1/1 for 3 mana, not that interesting. The leftover minion here, like, yeah, it's endless, but it's not impactful. It just doesn't make a difference. Even if you're like playing like demon buffs and stuff, it's still just this 1/1 base. I don't think this is going to be worth it at all. I just don't see a reason to run this card. I think this is actually a 1-star card, believe it or not. And then finally, I think, is the Bloodbound Imp here. We saw this one teased a long time ago. Finally getting the details. 2 mana, 2/5 demon. Whenever this attacks, deal 2 damage to your hero. So this feels like a Tamsin Quest setup card. Dark Lair, Pain, Warlock stuff also. Really nice stat line for 2 mana. It's going to be hard for your opponent to deal with this almost ever on turn 2, outside of like Shadow Word, Pain type hard removal stuff. But from damage standpoint, it's going to stick, which means you're going to get activations, which means you're going to push quests, you're going to push Dark Lair, which I think makes this a really cool engine for that kind of deck, making it a 4-star card. All right, so finally here we're going to close out with some neutral cards. Actually, some cool ones here, believe it or not. But starting off with a less cool one, Stubborn Suspect, 4 mana, 3/3, Death Rattle, summon a random 3-cost minion. So some Death Rattle synergies here, but unfortunately, as sticky as this is, the low rolls of 3 drops are there, right? You're going to hit stuff that just doesn't have a great stat line. So this isn't even as good always as like Piloted Shredder of old. In fact, in many cases, it might just be worse. I mean, yeah, maybe you get some 4/7 Injured Blade Masters on occasion, but those are going to be few and far between, which means this lacks consistency. It's not great on the front half. So I think this is a pretty weak 2-star card. There's also the Stormwind Guard, a 5 mana 4/5 with Taunt and Battlecry. Give adjacent minions +1/+1. This actually has some intriguing application, I think. The buff is nice. It's kind of got that Fungalmancer vibe. It's a pretty high pressure play. Taunt can be not as important if you're like on the forefront and you're more of an aggressive deck that cares more about these stats. But I don't know. It's not a great card, but it's pretty solid for a neutral sort of throwaway card. I'm not going to bump it to 3 stars. I think it's still a 2-star card, but it's not bad. There's also the Package Runner here, a 3 mana 5/6 that can only attack if you have at least 8 cards in hand. So this is another handlock support kind of card. It's got the vibe of some of those can't attack cards you used to run with like Sunfury Protectors and stuff. We don't have as much of that right now in Standard, but I don't actually think this card's going to be worth it. Like, yes, you'll have 8 cards in hand sometimes, but I don't think Handlock cares enough about the stats. I think you'd rather run 3 drops that are removal, that are card draw, that are advancing your game plan. Whereas this is just sort of complementary just to the side of it. And certainly aggro decks, which care about the stats more, aren't going to have that many cards in hand. So I think that means this is just kind of left in a gap where it really won't get played, making it a 2-star card. There's also the Deep Run Engineer here, a 2 mana 1/5 with a Battlecry, discover a mech. It costs 1 less. Some pretty bad mechs in existence, but and the front half of this is pretty terrible. There's discover synergies. If the discount matters, like maybe, but most of the time this card's just not going to be worth it. I think this is yet again a 2-star card. There's also the Florist, a 2 mana 2/3 at the end of your turn. Reduce the cost of a nature spell in your hand by 1. So some nature spell discounts are intriguing, but it just isn't enough, right? If you want like big plays, this is a fine play, but it's not a big play. It's not an exciting play. The discount's not meaningful enough that it would open up like a combo or anything. And the average discount's just not worth it to run. Otherwise, a pretty weak card in your deck. So again, I think this is 2 stars. We've also got the Guild Trader here, 4 mana 3/4 with tradable and spell damage +2. I think this is actually kind of intriguing. We have seen, the +2 spell damage stuff work in the past. I think nowadays 4 mana is kind of expensive to pay for just +2 spell damage, but the tradable is intriguing because, cards like this kind of sit in hand sometimes until you need the burst damage, but with tradable, you can put it back in the deck while you're doing something else, just waiting until you find your combo pieces and stuff, and then use this. That's got some interesting play to me. So, maybe even like OTK Demon Hunter puts this in the deck for a guaranteed skull. Maybe like a Rogue wants to save it up for burst damage. I think it's got a little bit of niche potential there. So I'm going to say 3 stars for the Guild Trader. There's also the Goldshire Knoll. It's 10 mana 5/4 rush. Costs 1 less for each other card in your hand. So, you know, it's crazy. I think this is like a better card than a Netheron, the legendary for Warlock. Like, yes, that one's bigger as an 8/6, but this guy has Rush and he has a sliding scale on his discount, whereas a Netheron, it's all or nothing. It either costs 1 or full cost if your hand is full or not. You know, so this card, you have 6 cards in hand, you're still maybe okay playing this, right? You know, but when you have 10 cards in hand, it's awesome. It's a 1 mana 5/4, right? So, or actually, I guess, oh, it's each other card. Yeah. So 1 mana 5/4. So I don't know. I think it's better than a Netheron. I still don't know if it's enough for like a hand lock. I still think they have better removal. They probably want to rely on spells and like, you know, shadow spells for Tamsin and AoEs. And I don't know if this is good enough to support that. It's not high pressure like Giants used to be. It's more reactive. And Warlock does reactive pretty well otherwise. So are there other classes that make sense for this? It's going to be tough. So I think this is unfortunately a 2-star card, even though I think it's actually better than the legendary handlock support for Netheron that's very similar. Next up here is the Battleground Battlemaster, 5 mana 5/5 with adjacent minions have Wind Fury. This is kind of intriguing in an aggro deck. I wouldn't sleep on this card at all. It feels like it could be a great mid-range follow-up. Just stick a couple boards. It's worth a ton of damage. It's got a big stat line itself. There are some crazy pop-off potentials if your opponent leaves anything behind. You have like a buff to weave in with this. So if an aggro deck makes room for this, don't be surprised. I think this is actually kind of cool, and maybe even a Battlegrounds card too. Who knows? It's called Battleground Battlemaster, so it's got some potential there. I actually think this is a sleeper 4-star card. Next up's the Northshire Farmer, 3 mana 3/3 Battlecry, shuffle a friendly, or choose a friendly beast, shuffle 3 3/3 copies into your deck. So this is cool with Elwyn Boar for a Sword of a Thousand Truths deck. Also, just could get some value beasts into your deck for something like Hunter that wants, you know, buffed copies of Trampling Rhinos or something is always a possibility. It's probably a little slow for that. You know, you probably want to play this on something more early game. That said, you know, it takes a long time for something like this to get value outside of exactly like Elwyn Boar, and even then I guess it takes a long time. So feels like this card's probably just a little bit too slow because it's more value deck based as opposed to tempo board based. So I think unfortunately it's just a 2-star card. There's here the Royal Librarian, a 4 mana 3/4 tradable with Battlecry, silence a minion. So this is basically flipped Spellbreaker with tradable. I think the tradable makes some decks run this just because it's that flexible silence. It will still be meta dependent. There will be metas where silences just don't matter at all, but there might be other metas where there's some really high value silence target, and teching in one of these with tradable won't really hurt your deck much because of tradable, which makes this a pretty solid option, and I think a 3-star card. There's also the Stockades Guard, a 1 mana 1/3 Battlecry, give a friendly minion taunt. So solid base stat line here if you play it on 1, but then the Battlecry is kind of whiffy. And then is the Battlecry actually useful later? I don't know. I mean, you got like Battlecry chains of stuff in duels or something. Sure, maybe this, you know, has some upside, but I think in standard it just doesn't quite do enough. It doesn't stand out enough. And requiring another minion to make this even halfway decent is just not worth it. You just run like Armor Vendor in the same sort of deck that would prefer to have a card like this one. So I think I'm actually going to give this one 1 star. There's also the Moarg Forge Fiend here, an 8 mana 8/8 demon with taunt and death rattle, gain 8 armor. So it's kind of like a big light shower elemental almost at 8 mana, which a little slower than a card like Light Shower. It doesn't heal friendly minions like Light Shower, but it does open up demon synergies for N'Zoth for any kind of late game deck that wants a big defensive demon. This is perfect for the N'Zoth sort of thing for those kinds of decks, including like Control N'Zoth Priest might toss one of these in to give them an awesome demon to summon. So is this going to be everywhere? No, of course not. It's just really big and a big commitment that most decks won't be able to afford. Could it go in big decks? Could it go in N'Zoth decks? Absolutely, making it a pretty solid 3-star card, I think. Maybe even like 3.5 stars if that was a thing I did. Next up's the Enthusiastic Banker, 3 mana 2/3. At the end of your turn, store a card from your deck. So basically it's, I think, choosing a card from your deck and kind of remembering it almost like an Augmented Relic. And then Death Rattle, add the stored cards to your hand. So basically like a reverse Augmented Relic in a way. What this means is, you know, you can get like extra copies of now, I don't think this means copies. I think it's basically just drawing a card and putting it in the Death Rattle. So if you have like Death Rattle synergies or copy effects, you can get more versions of the same card. So very occasionally there might be like burst damage you get extra copies of, or some insane value card you get extra copies of, like a prime or something. That said, I think this is just going to be way too inconsistent, way too hard to play around. I don't think the Death Rattle's upside will be worth it because it's not like impacting the board immediately. It's just card advantage and resource advantage. So feels a little slow to me, making it a 2-star card. Next up's the Lion's Guard, which this card looks sick. The artwork on this is really cool. This is a 5 mana 4/6 with Battlecry. If you have 15 or less health, gain +2/+4 and taunt. So if you've taken a ton of damage, this could be a big swing recovery. It's a 6/10 taunt for 5 mana, which is really nuts for decks that don't have hard removal. Think about like maybe Druid or Demon Hunter that would have to really chunk through this. So there might be very slim meta windows where a card like this is worth it, but I think the conditionality is rough because there's a lot of instances where you're like 17 health on turn 5 and your opponent hits you for like 10 and this card feels dead, right? I'm worried it's occasionally not going to line up, and that's going to make it feel really bad to run a card like this. So intriguing, maybe a good arena card, maybe duels and stuff, but mostly I think a 2-star card. There's also the Cheesemonger here, 4 mana 3/6. Whenever your opponent casts a spell, add a random spell with the same cost to your hand. So this is one of those kind of cheesy burgle cards. Cheesy, huh? Where you just try to get some crazy pop off. But yeah, super inconsistent. It's not really punishing your opponent for playing spells that much. You know, Ogremancer really punishes them. This is more about like shenanigans and hijinks. So I don't think this will be worth it. I think this is still just a 2-star card. Next up's the Nobleman. 3 mana 2/3 Battlecry. Create a golden copy of a random card in your hand. Or in other words, the most OP Battlegrounds card of all time. But in standard, you know, it's a random card in hand, so it's not something you can choose unless you get down to exactly one card. So like combo possibilities exist where you get like the perfect thing in hand and you double it, but it's going to be tough. That seems really awkward and rare. So I don't think you really do that. So this is more of like just a general value card, add more stuff into your hand. Maybe a priest can use that somehow, right? Just getting extra value. Maybe there's Battlecry synergies, but I think it's pretty niche, and most decks really won't be able to carve out a spot for that. They just rather have another good card that did something as opposed to a copy of another random card that maybe not be any better than the card they could choose to run. So I'm going to say 2 stars. Next up is the City Architect here, 6 mana 4/4 Battlecry, summon 2/0/5 Castle Walls with Taunt. Those don't do anything special. They're not mechs or anything, of course, just big taunt bodies. And yeah, I mean, this is a big disruptive card, really slows down opponents. The problem for this one is I think it just doesn't trade well, right? Like you'd rather probably just run a big 6 mana taunt that trades or does some other valuable effect. This is more of just a roadblock that's just a stall. It doesn't really advance your defensive game plan necessarily. So, you know, maybe a cool arena card or something to buy you time into a Flame Strike. But for standard, I just don't think it gets there. It's another 2-star card. Next up's the Stockades Prisoner. It's a 2 mana 5/4 that starts dormant, and after you play 3 cards, this awakens. I actually think this is pretty intriguing. This is just such an insanely big stat line for 2 mana. And putting this in an aggro deck that's playing a bunch of stuff alongside it, just like dumping 1-drops or cheap spells, 0 mana stuff in Rogue, for instance, could maybe get a really big threat on board early. It kind of has vibes of the Hunter demon that awakens after 2 turns. This doesn't attack immediately, but you kind of control how quickly it wakes up. So I don't know if that lack of attack is what will hold this back too much, because that's clearly what makes that card so good. But I don't know. There still might be some decks that just care enough about these big stats early if you're really pushing that this could get there. So I'm intrigued enough to give this one a 3-star rating. Next up is Lady Prester, legendary neutral, 6 mana 6/7. She's an ogre. And her Battlecry reads, transform minions in your deck into random dragons. They keep their original stats and cost. So the idea here is if you have, say, like a bunch of 1 mana minions in your deck, you can transform them into dragons. They'll still be 1 mana, 1/3s or whatever, but they might have Ysera's Battlecry because they're going to be a 1 mana, 1/3 Ysera. Or they might have Alexstrasza's Battlecry or Plagued Polterdrake's Death Rattle. And if you look across the dragons, some aren't that exciting, you know, like getting a Brightwing with, you know, similar or worse stats, just for instance, you know, wouldn't be great. But like getting a cheap Ysera, cheap Alexstrasza's, some intriguing things could happen there. So I could almost envision this as kind of a bailout card for like an aggro deck. It's got a pretty low curve and lots of minions, and you just play this late in the game. And you kind of try to transform all that garbage into like a random Ysera or Alexstrasza that gives you a second wind in the game. That said, we've had those kinds of effects before. Things like Prince Liam come to mind that didn't really do enough. Like they just kind of were a bad card, like just run damage or run high pressure card instead of like Lady Prester or Prince Liam. And that usually goes a lot further. So I think this will end up being more of a meme than, useful. So, and then beyond the turning cheap minions into higher value stuff, I don't see a lot of use cases for this one. Beyond that, like it just, maybe on average your cards are slightly better, but you're probably running cards that do something specific. So I don't think this gets any play outside of that exact scenario, meaning, unfortunately, as much as I'm going to play this one and have fun with it, I think it's still only a 2-star card. Next up's the Encumbered Pack Mule, a 2-mana 2/3 beast with taunt. Whenever you draw this, add a copy of it to your hand. So basically, a great way to fill your hand for hand buff stuff. And you're gonna, get 2 minions instead of 1 with every draw, making any hand buff you utilize go 2 for 1. You're also gonna get some just potentially big defensive taunts. So there's like Taunt Warrior hand buff stuff. There's Paladin that's got some hand buff stuff rolling now. I think this is actually kind of intriguing. It's just like a value card. It gives you a lot of ways to fill in mana pretty easily since they're cheap. Any buffs might duplicate depending on, if you, for instance, like Scavenger's Ingenuity into this or something, and Hunter could get a buff that doubles up. There's just all kinds of little interesting shenanigans with this card that make it more intriguing than you might think at first glance. So I think this guy's actually 3 stars. Next up's the Traveling Merchant, a tradable 3-mana 2/3 with Battlecry gain +1/+1 for each other friendly minion you control. So this is like an old Frostwolf Warlord sort of card. The tradable means if you don't have any minions on board, you could kind of pass it back and try to get some wide boards. That said, I just don't think the payoff here is high enough. Like, yes, it could be a 3-mana 7/8 or something really big. But if you're running token decks, I think usually you want to buff those tokens. If you're in Druid, you want to leverage that wide board. It can be nice to stagger into tall things like this, but since it's just stats and nothing else, that always makes me really nervous for a card like this one, and it's not pushing for the win immediately. It's just kind of doubling down, and that's sometimes not good enough. So I don't really think this card will get there. 2 stars. And then finally, our very last card, I guess. It's the Entrapped Sorceress, a 3-mana 3/4 with Battlecry. If you control a quest, discover a spell. And yeah, this is cool. I mean, it's sort of like a Venomous Scorpid that's not much better in some ways, right? It's conditional, so it's kind of worse once you've completed your quest. But I think that's okay. There will be certain decks that still value this a little bit more because they care more about like onboard pressure. So like a faster quest deck might use this, whereas a slower quest deck might just prefer a Venomous Scorpid to make sure it's working all the time. But a card like this, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it makes it into a couple prominent quest decks, especially if there's any bonus synergies that open up with spells and those sorts of things. So I think Entrapped Sorceress is a pretty solid 4-star card. And that said, that's it. That wraps it up for our Stormwind reviews, guys. Man, there's a lot of cards this time. So thanks for bearing with me through this. This has been a weird reveal season for sure. Disrupted one, a tough one in a lot of ways. So thanks for your patience, and hopefully we'll get to play these cards soon and enjoy them a ton. There's a lot of cool things to try out. So share your thoughts on these. Tell me what you're looking forward to playing the most in the expansion. Thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.